The Tacoma fans file out of a suddenly quiet Tacoma Dome, and on the floor, Mike Renshaw with the man who guided it all.
Because that's what it says. Gordon Jago, Sidekicks coach. Well, I'm going to ask you, Gordon, is what you're feeling right now?
Oh, I can't say. I'm just so happy for everybody and for everything. I mean, it's an unbelievable story. It must have been written up there because it couldn't happen any other way.
Well, what a finish to it. Just a tremendous season.
Oh, yeah. Great credit to both teams. It's been a magnificent series. It's been a tremendous advert for MISL. It's a tragedy that somebody had to lose. I'm glad it's not us, but at the same time, great credit to all the players.
Well, Carpen again. He did it 2 nights ago. He did it again tonight.
That's right. He keeps coming up with those all-important goals, and he's there when it matters most. And it's just, I have to say, I've no words. I can normally speak, but I can't tonight. I'm sorry. It's great.
Well, it's been a fairy tale season, Gordon. It surely has, and it ends with a glass slipper, right? And not the poison apple.
Well, we said we wouldn't wait until midnight.
That's Gordon Jago, head coach of the MISL champion Dallas Sidekicks. Back to you, Norm.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, all right, everybody, let's do this. How are you? My name is Tim Hanlon, and I welcome you to our little proceedings. We call this little podcast Good Seats Still Available. And as you know, it's our weekly little journey into what used to be in professional sports. I can't thank you enough for finding us and downloading us and streaming us and listening to us, or however you're consuming us. However you're doing that, we appreciate it. And we also appreciate our guest this week, Gordon Jago, for a wonderful conversation that I think you're going to really enjoy, especially if you grew up watching the Tampa Bay Rowdies, say as a kid in the 70s and early 80s, perhaps. You were rattling around the stands in 1968 or 69 watching the Baltimore Bays of the then fledgling North American Soccer League, or perhaps you grew up and or are still in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area and were, or perhaps still are, a Dallas Sidekicks indoor soccer fan from the old MISL, the old CISL, and maybe perhaps even today's version in the MASL. Gordon Jago is the guy who is the unique link amongst all of those teams, a veteran and a prolific coach across all those teams and more, as we'll get into in our chat, was there with Clive Toye, our former guest, on an old episode a few weeks ago with the Baltimore Bays when the NASL was not necessarily long for this life, down to 5 teams in 1969. And Gordon Jago was the coach. He was also the coach the year before when they newly merged NASL from the 2 leagues prior to that in 1967. So some interesting stories there about how that came to be, how that story ended. Some interesting, I think, heretofore untold little tidbits about the story of the Baltimore Bays. So give a listen for that. Some very interesting conversation around the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Circa 1978 through 1982 or so, including 2 Soccer Bowl finalist appearances, one in 1978 versus the Cosmos and one in 1979 against the Vancouver Whitecaps, neither emerging victorious, however, but a very storied franchise, the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and Gordon Jago was the head coach for some of the biggest years of that franchise's history. We get knee-deep into that. That's also worth the price of admission right there. And then if that weren't enough, and by golly, shouldn't it be, we get into almost, I guess, a dozen plus years of indoor soccer stuff, that of the Dallas Sidekicks variety, from, I guess that was the earlier to mid 1980s, all the way through almost the good part of the 1990s, with Gordon Jago as the head coach and for a number of years the general manager and the chief cook and bottle washer for that franchise. And if you grew up in the Dallas Metroplex area, you will certainly remember vividly some fine championship seasons, one in the MISL in 1988, which you just heard as the intro to the show. Again, it was another championship in the CISL. And of course, you're probably going to remember many sweaty shirts being thrown into the stands as the inimitable Tattoo did his scoring celebration after many, many goals at Reunion Arena and elsewhere for that matter. We get into all of that stuff with the legendary coach and American soccer pioneer. His name is Gordon Jago, and we had a great chat, and I welcome you to it in just a couple of seconds after we get a couple of promotional things out of the way, shall we? Okay, let's do that. Oldschoolshirts.com, a relatively new sponsor, our friends in Cincinnati. We love oldschoolshirts.com, and you will too. I'm certain of it. High quality T-shirts and garb with great logos and remembrances from teams and leagues no longer with us, as well as a whole bunch of other things related to sort of pop culture, perhaps around the stadia or stadiums, you pick your plural, that were around during those times when those leagues and teams were around, but perhaps maybe the stadiums themselves are not there anymore. Well, they're remembered fondly at oldschoolshirts.com, as well as the teams and their logos and all kinds of stuff. High quality stuff. You will not be disappointed. Don't be fooled by other sort of imitators out there. The real McGilla you will find at oldschoolshirts.com. And of course, we got you covered when you decide to buy a few of those shirts. Make sure you use that promo code GOODSEATS. Yep, that's the promo code GOODSEATS, and you will get 10% off all of your purchases. That's oldschoolshirts.com. We thank them for their patronage of our show, and I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy the experience as well. You will also enjoy the experience from our friends out of San Diego at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And there you can use the promo code GOODSEATS, and you can get 15% off all of your purchases. And that's memorabilia. You want pennants, they got them. You want buttons, they got them. You want media guides, check. You want, you want yearbooks, they have those too. There's a whole bunch of buttons and stickers and you name it, from scorecards from all kinds of teams and leagues that are no longer with us or previously incarnated. There's a new inventory just about every week, beautifully photographed. That's what he's trying to say in his Elmer Fudd-like way, by our friend Dean Mitchell and friends there at sportshistorycollectibles.com. And again, make sure you use that promo code GOODSEATS, will ya? No, good seats, not the will ya part. And that's going to get you 15% off all of your purchases at at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Boy, oh boy, it's been a long day, and we look forward to getting this interview underway, as we will right now. Here is our great chat with the great coach, Gordon Jago, that we had just a few weeks ago. As you may know, we just today, this morning, on our weekly publishing schedule, just dropped our episode with one gentleman by the name of Clive Toye.
Oh, geez.
A fantastic interview and a long time sought after conversation. But maybe you could enlighten our mostly American, although I'm surprised at how many other folks around the world access this show. You'd be shocked as to the countries and stuff. But for our mostly American audience, perhaps you can give us a bit of a background of you as a player and as a fledgling coach before you even came to these shores in the United States. And I think Mr. Toye probably has something to do with that once you get to the end of that little preamble.
Absolutely correct, Tim. Absolutely, yes. Well, again, my history goes back, like most kids in England at school. You played soccer, and I was very fortunate. I played for the school team, then I played for the district team, then I played for the state team, and then, of course, I played for England under 18s. So, as a young boy at school, I had an interest in soccer, and was fortunate to enjoy success. And of course, at that age, I went on to college. My father did not want me to sign professional forms. I had two offers, one from Tottenham Hotspur and one from Charlton, as Charlton Athletic in the British First Division. But my father felt that I should concentrate on my education first and foremost. So I went off to college, and then after I finished college, I signed as a part-time professional and then a full-time professional with Charlton Athletic, and that started my career as a player, and then very quickly following on, I was introduced to coaching at a very young age by Ron Greenwood, the men manager of West Ham United, and eventually I got my coaching qualifications, and then when I finished my playing career, I went into coaching, and the rest is history. I've had the good fortune to go as a coach to as a manager, both in England and here in the United States. And even now, at this old age, I'm still involved with the Dallas Cup, the big youth international soccer. So that's a quick resume of my career. It stretches back a long way, but as I said, very fortunate, had a very enjoyable and successful career, and still involved.
Well, sure, no doubt. So the Charlton Athletic years, right? So obviously you're a player. You were a center back by trade, right?
Correct, yes. And that came about when I went for the district side for the trials. I was the tallest. I think I was about 6'1", and I played inside forward for the school and such. But the coach in charge of selection of the state side, he selected me as a centre back because I was so tall, you see, and that started it. So I never know if I'd have been lucky enough to continue as perhaps a goal scoring inside forward, but no, I was a centre back.
Well, okay, so your playing days, right? So you had a pretty lengthy career for a soccer player at the time, right? I mean, you had about 8-9 years there at Charlton, and maybe somewhat, and maybe this is not surprising back in the day, but with one club, right? Really no movement or transfer, and a bit of stability there.
That's very true. That's a good point you bring up, Tim, because there's no doubt about it. Both, if you look at the history of the game, particularly in England, in my period of time, there were players who had long careers at one club. I had 12 years with Charlton Athletic, just the one club. And you also saw the same with managers and coaches. The Shankleys of this world, the Fergusons of this world, who had long careers. Now today, if you look at it, players move on from club to club. As a coach or as a manager, if you lose 3 or 4 games, you're out. It's a vastly different time. There was much more loyalty on both the club side and the players' side in my career.
Well, despite that, though, I mean, you started as effectively after your studies, right? As a late blooming or as a later teenager, right? And after even just that period of time, I mean, you're still only 28, 29 years old when you basically segue into coaching, right? How did that come about? Your segue into coaching?
Well, it's two things. One, I was very fortunate that I went away with the England training team. They had 17 players, a national team going on a tour, and they needed 5 or 6 more for the training games prior to them going overseas to Europe for their 3-game tour. And my club, the trainer, was the trainer for England. So he took 5 of us to train with the England team and make up the 22 for practice games. And that's where I met a gentleman called Ron Greenwood, who at that time was a player with Fulham, still, also a centre-back, and he was also a staff coach. And he introduced me to coaching, and that was the start. So at a very early age, I think I was about 25, I went on a course by the Football Association in England, got my preliminary awards, then I got my full badge, and then the director of coaching selected me to be a staff coach. And so I was the youngest staff coach, even though I was still playing at Charlton. So I couldn't coach a team because I'm a player playing every Saturday. But I got on to lots of courses for the federation and such. And so I got an early start to my coaching career, and I was a staff coach and went overseas to European conferences. And I was starting to see a whole different game. No disrespect to Charlton Athletic, but we were not perhaps the most progressive in terms of training and coaching as we perhaps should have been. But I was seeing a whole different world by being with the federation. So at a very early age, I got involved in coaching. And then when I was 29, I was already getting a bit despondent, to be truthful. I found it very difficult going away and seeing how soccer was being played in other parts of the world, different styles, different coaching and such, and I wasn't seeing it at my club. So a little bit of disappointment, and then I got kicked in the eye in a game against Middlesbrough, and I almost lost my sight due to a blood clot, and then I was out for 3 months, And as the season drew to an end, I made a decision at 29 not to continue playing and to step into coaching.
Well, so would you characterize that then as a happy chance then, or did you sort of have a knowledge of maybe what your post-playing career might look like either in or outside the sport, hence the coaching exposure and experience?
Well, I think it was a combination of being disappointed. I was so lucky because I was a staff coach at, I think, 26 or 27, and I was now mixing with the best managers and coaches in England at the conferences, at the courses during the summer months. And then when I went back to my club, it was not as good as it should have been, in my humble opinion. But I wasn't a rebel. I behaved myself and I did what I had to do as a player. But I wasn't enjoying the situation. And then I think once that injury came about, it kind of made me make the decision to now say, okay, finish that. Let's look for a career as a coach. And as I say, I was already a staff coach. I was working for the Federation at summer courses and such. So it kind of, I was lucky, Tim. I think it just fell into place. And I enjoyed the coaching. I certainly enjoyed meeting the quality of managers and coaches I met both in England and around the world at that time. So I was very fortunate.
Well, but speaking of falling in place, right, you're doing this sort of career transition at perhaps the most fortuitous time in English soccer history, right, given the hosting of the 1966 World Cup, right?
That's right.
What were you doing between your playing days and your what was that like, and what part of that were you sort of exposed to or experiencing as part of your sort of coaching learning, shall we say?
Well, it was twofold. I'd already left Charlton Athletic. I think I finished in 62. So I then went with the FA because they had an association with an amateur club on the south coast of England where I could go there and they were amateur players, they weren't professional, and you could be training the players there, but then I was free to do all the work for the Federation. So I was able to go on courses. I was made the team coach of the England under-18 team and took them on tour to play international games. So still at an early age, I was now a coach, but I was a coach in a small club where you weren't in the limelight. So you could learn and make mistakes, and nobody knew about them if need be. And it was a great education because, as I say, it gave me a chance to man management, select teams, organize the training, and then at the same time work for the Federation and then be the national coach for the under-18 team. So I was getting a good apprenticeship working with the Greenwoods of this world and the Jimmy Hills and Alan Browns, all these top coaches on the British circuit. And at the same time, leading in. In fact, in 1960, I helped the Olympic team, the British Olympic team, with Norman Creek to prepare for the Olympic Games. And I think they were held in Rome. So I was getting a lot of experience at an early age, and I think it stood me in good stead for later on in life when I went into the professional game after leaving the amateur club and going to Fulham Football Club as the head coach of a First Division team.
All right, so explain to our audience a little bit of sort of the pathway that led you, that got you to, ensnared you in, shall we say, perhaps to your first exposure into the international beautiful game, shall we say, in the great United States of America, which arguably is quite naive to it, at least on the solid pro level, circa 1966-67. This is where we sort of mentioned a guy named Clive Toye. Maybe you can give our audience a sense of how you stumbled across the pond, shall we say, to the lovely hamlet of Baltimore for your debut in American soccer coaching.
Yes. Well, what happened was I was with Fulham Football Club, the British First Division, and we had an invitation to come across and play Honved of Hungary in Oakland. And it was at the time as you were preparing for the very first period of professional soccer, the North American Soccer League, I think it was at the time. And so I came across with Fulham, and we played in Oakland, and I met a lot of American coaches and such there. And Clive Toye was there because Clive had already come over, and he was the general manager of Baltimore Bays, owned by the Orioles, in the North American Soccer League. And Clive and I knew each other from London because Clive had been a top soccer reporter for the Daily Express. So, of course, with me coming over, when I came back from Oakland to England, I received a number of phone calls offering me positions in the United States in the new league, including one from Clive to come to the Baltimore Bays. And I decided that it would be in fact, I fell in love with America on a visit to San Francisco when we played in Oakland. It was a tremendous experience. It was my first ever visit to the United States, and it was an enjoyable experience. And I thought it would be, when Clive offered me the position at Baltimore, I thought it would be a great experience. I thought that, this was the start of a big experiment by the American Soccer Association to have a professional league, and I was going to be part of that. And so, and to be truthful, it was a very nice salary in comparison to the one I was earning at Fulham Football Club at that time. So I was recently married. I had a young daughter. I think she was 3 at the time. So, we decided that we'd take the plunge and accept Baltimore's offer. And so I came across and joined the Baltimore Bays with Clive as the general manager.
So that's obviously a big jump, especially given that, as you were probably aware at the time, or maybe you were blithely unaware, right? In late 1967, the league, well, actually, there were 2 leagues, right? The United Soccer Association, which was the full importation of teams, and this National Professional Soccer League, in which the Bays played, which was arguably, actually not arguably, was by all historical accounts, was sort of branded an outlaw league by FIFA for a bunch of different reasons. So I'm just curious. It sounds like you were sort of entering this Baltimore Bays situation, coming off of this sort of crazy competition of 2 leagues the year before, of which there were none, right? And the sort of recognition that, maybe cooler heads needed to prevail, and maybe combining the efforts into one league would be the better way to sort of give it a fair shot. Do you remember anything about sort of your how you were, shall we say, wined and dined, and what you were promised by Clive as you were decided to come to the United States? Was it that clear that you were sort of stepping into such, cacophony or unsettledness?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because I got criticized very heavily in the British press for leaving a First Division club as the head coach under the manager. Supposedly, one of the youngsters coming forward and a good career ahead of him. And I got very, very great criticism in the British press because at that time, as you quite rightly said, that league was not even sanctioned by FIFA at that time. But Clive had told me very quietly and confidentially that with the talks that were going on at that time, that those 2 leagues were going to join forces, become one league, and therefore would then be recognized by the United States Soccer Federation and therefore sanctioned by FIFA. But I know my father kept a scrapbook, and I know I got criticized very heavily for fancy leaving Fulham Football Club, the British First Division, and going to a renegade league in the United States, Yep. But Clive had convinced me also that amalgamation was going to take place and that we would have sanctioned by the FIFA, and so it would be a recognized soccer league. And that did happen. And that's exactly what did happen.
Yeah. So in this 1968 now renamed North American Soccer League. Okay. So it seems to me like you coached there for 2 seasons. It seems like it was almost a tale of 2 seasons, right? 1968 was sort of, the best, I guess, of the 2 leagues coming together and a fairly substantial U.S. and Canadian footprint of teams. And then 1969, which was almost the ultimate collapse, where I think there were barely 5 or 6 teams. Maybe a few little pointed memories of sort of both of those seasons?
Yes.
What it was like to play in Baltimore for a beer baron, et cetera. What was that all about? What was it like?
Well, again, there were 17 teams in that first year that I was here. And you're quite right. At the end of that season, it dropped to 5 and was almost extinct. But there were 5 teams left, and they decided that they would bring in 5 foreign teams, West Ham United, I think, Aston Villa, Wolves, Dundee, to play for each of those cities. So Baltimore, knowing Ron Greenwood, suggested, and we were lucky we got West Ham United to play for Baltimore, and there was a kind of international league with West Ham United representing Baltimore just to get the season, because with only 5 teams, you were limited to the number of games you could play, and the season wouldn't have been that long. So we had this 2-tier situation whereby we had the foreign teams in, all from Scotland and England, playing on behalf of St. Louis, Kansas, Dallas and Baltimore, and that part was the first part of the season. Well, it wasn't very successful. The attendances were very low, and then before we started the season, our own season amongst the 5 teams, Mr. Hoffberger, who owned the Orioles and owned us, took us to Dallas to a meeting of the 5 owners with Mr. Cashin, who was the Baltimore Orioles general manager, and Joe Hamper, the chief financial officer, and myself. And we went to a meeting in Dallas with the other 4 clubs. And much to our surprise, because Mr. Cashin didn't know, Joe Hamper didn't know, and I didn't know, Mr. Hoffberger stood up at the beginning of that meeting and said, "Gentlemen, Baltimore Bays will play this season, but will close at the end of the season." And you could imagine the shock to the other 4 owners and the shock to us 3 from Baltimore. But that was Mr. Hoffberger's decision. He then said, we will be leaving, and it should remain silent, because it was in the best interest of everybody that Baltimore's decision would not be known. We would complete the season, fulfill all our obligations to the fixtures, to the finance, etc., etc. But at the end of that season, 1969, it would close. So that was it. We flew back from Baltimore in his private jet to New York. He dropped off to go to some business. We continued back to Baltimore, and so there we were. We found out before the season started with our team that we were closing at the end of the season. We were not allowed to tell anyone. We did, and so that was a secret that I had to keep. Our restrictions were many financially. We couldn't have full-time professionals. In fact, I went to New York and I got 5 New York boys, players in the New York German League, I think most of them, and they used to come and play just on Saturday. We didn't see them in the week. We weren't training because that was it. And of course, it was a disaster. But we kept quiet. Nothing was said until the end of the season, and then it was announced that the Baltimore Bays would close. But we knew, the top echelon of this club, that it was the last season, and it was very difficult. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever experienced, but I think it gave me a toughness to deal with such a terrible situation, because I couldn't tell the players that this was the end of the season. This was it. We put on a brave front. Our record was very, very poor. I don't know what it was now. It was pretty poor, as it had to be. But we knew all along at the end of the season it was over, and the Baltimore Bays would no longer exist.
At what point did you the press that was actually covering the team, and I can't imagine it was that voluminous, the amount of reporters and stuff. At what point did it kind of leak out? Because I mean, you would also. Okay, but it had. I mean, if you were paying attention, right? And again, this is all in hindsight. You were there. I was not. You had moved from Memorial Stadium, right, for the previous 2 years, right?
Oh yeah,
cavernous 50,000 seater. The Orioles also used to a looked like kind of a high school field, right? No more than 10,000 seats, right? So it almost feels to me like it was, I don't know, you couldn't help but look at the, it could be looked at as an austerity move, right? But also maybe it was sort of the beginning of the end. Or...
Yeah, the local press boys, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tim. Local press boys were writing about the decline. And as I say, we moved deliberately. I mean, it was a set plan to destroy or to end the Baltimore Bays. But Mr. Hoffberger made it very clear to me that it was to remain quiet because he didn't want any adverse criticism to affect his national beer company or the Baltimore Orioles, etc., from the soccer population of Baltimore. He wanted it closed down as quietly as possible and at least expense as possible. And so we then moved to the high school. Then, and not many people know this, the high school playground, car park was turned up, broken up. And it was all a deliberate plan to create an atmosphere for Mr. Hoffberger at the end of the season when he announced that we were finished. People say, well, it's understandable. They weren't drawing anybody. Nobody was going to the games. They weren't a good team. They're bottom of the league. They only won 3 games or whatever it was. And so it was easy then to close it down, but it was done deliberately. And as you said, the press were writing about the demise, yes, but it was never stated by anybody. The press would say, you know, what's happening here, da-da-da, it's probably going to be the last. I mean, because you don't go from the Baltimore stadium to a high school stadium, and then because people then had to park in the street, and it wasn't a desirable area, and you could come back to your car and your wheels might be gone. But I think it was a very cold, calculated plan by the senior people of the Orioles to create that situation so that it saved Mr. Hoffberger and his other industries severe criticism from the public in any way, shape, and form.
Very interesting. All right, so a couple of quick questions before we get off of this relatively dark period in your career. And I don't mean to harp on it, of course.
Hey, I tell you what, it was a very harsh period. You can imagine the situation that you can't say a word. You've got to put a brave face on. You've got to say the right things to the players and try and work them. But it probably made me. It probably made me, for my future, that after such adverse criticism, because remember, if the team is losing, never mind all these other things, everybody's pointing the finger at you, the coach. You're the coach, and look at this terrible team. You can only win. So I think I grew stronger as a person, and I think it stood me in stead later on in life.
All right, so before we leave it then, why do you think Hoffberger went on with the 1969 season then? Because it seems like most of the, I wouldn't call them carpetbaggers, but, other baseball owners and or rich folk who had backed one of the 2 leagues in 67 and then the reconstituted NASL in 68, pretty much seems like most of them, with a few exceptions like Lamar Hunt, et cetera, ran for the doors, right? Ran for the hills. At the end of 68. Why do you think Hoffberger stayed around, especially given that he was so relatively quick into the 1969 season to basically wind it down?
Well, first and foremost, he saw the demise of the league. You don't go from 17 to 5, right? But secondly, I think he had a good friendship with some of the other owners in some of the other teams, with Lamar and with the St. Louis owner. And I think what happened was that if he had said we're finished, the league was gone. I mean, 5 was bad, and 4 would have been impossible. And so I think that Lamar and the other owners convinced him to give it one more shot, try this program with bringing the 5 British teams in to represent them, to give them some more games and perhaps some more revenue. And I think Hoffberger was going to go along with that. But then we had West Ham United, and I think we were only drawing at the stadium at that time around 5,000 people. And West Ham had 3 players from that 1966 England World team. Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, and Jeff Hurst. So then Hoffberger must have said, well, look, I've got a hell of a team in from England, top players, 3 World Cup winners, and we still can't draw. Finish.
All right, so how do you, aside once the deed is officially known and done, what happens to Gordon Jago and his fledgling career in the United States? What happens next?
Yeah, but because I got to like the United States, and I was now preparing, not because I knew that we were finished, and there were some opportunities for me to come back to England. But a good friend of mine who's owned a sports business, store in Pennsylvania, came to me and he said, look, do you want to stay in the United States? I said, yeah. He said, okay. He said, I want you to run my soccer business, a shop, a store, and sell soccer equipment, and I'll give you the same salary you're getting from the Bays, da, da, da. And so all of a sudden I decided to stay because I was enjoying life in America. My wife was, certainly. And so I then went to Pennsylvania, to Westchester, and worked for Peter Green Limited with Bob Green, and he's still around today. He's 90-odd years of age and still a good friend. And I built his soccer store up into supplying the equipment to all the colleges and such. But of course, it was a temporary thing. After about a year, 6 months, I knew it wasn't me. I didn't want to spend my life doing that. I wanted to be a coach. And Bob didn't believe, he couldn't believe, because he said, and it's true, he said, and he still says it to this day, you would have been a millionaire. Because his store was the only one in the United States had access to real good uniforms and soccer shoes and soccer balls. And I was able to get so many colleges to buy the into it. So anyway, cut a long story short, it was an interesting period of about a year in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And again, but eventually I decided this wasn't for us. And also my wife's mother was dying of cancer, and so we came back to back to United Kingdom.
And that was with QPR, and then with Millwall, right? So they were top tier at that time. I forgot. My Premier / First Division history
not quite
lofts away from me.
Not quite, Tim. When I came back in 1970 to England, and QPR wanted me to be their coach, and I became the coach in 1970. They were in the second division at that time. They had been in the first, but had been relegated 1 or 2 years before. And so I got the job as the coach, and that was in January of 1970. And in January 71, the manager was released, and I was given the job as the team manager in 1971. At Queen's Park Rangers. And then we were second division, and then I got promoted to the first division the year later in 72, and then I stayed there till 75, 76, and then I left there and went to Millwall, which was also a second division club.
All right, so how do you then get back to the United States? Because obviously it made some impression, and the next move that you made after your dalliances in the English leagues was with arguably a very seminal franchise in the history of the North American Soccer League in Tampa Bay. How does that come about? Well,
in 1974, Tampa Bay contacted me. I was at QPR, manager, enjoying a very good career. And Tampa Bay came across to England to meet me and asked me if I would come as their head coach. Well, there was no way at that time. I mean, I was enjoying, I got them to the first division. I was a manager of a first division club, which has always been one's ambition. And probably, well, we did. We had a terrific team that we built. We bought some good players in the transfer market, and we were very, very successful. And so I said no to Tampa Bay. They asked me to give them some names for recommendations, and what I did was Eddie Fermani, a former player with me at Charlton, and Eddie came over in 1974 as the head coach of the Rowdies. Well, in 1976, I'd come across as guest of George Strawbridge for a vacation to see them. And whilst I was here, Eddie left Eddie Smiley left the Rowdies and went to the Cosmos. So George asked me again, and I said, no, I'm going back to Millwall, and that was it. But then I had a very bad experience with the BBC over a television program about Millwall Football Club, because it had a reputation of hooliganism at that time. A lot of problems on the terraces, and it had a very bad reputation. I was working hard to try and change that. I built a very good youth organization with youth players. I got them promotion from the third division into the second, and everything was going on that score very well. But once they televised this program and showed some of the terrible scenes, and it was very critical, and it was very untrue. A lot of it was untrue, and it killed it for me. And my chairman, owner, said to the BBC chairman, you've killed our club. I've lost, and of course, I then got another offer from Tampa, and I felt that program had killed it for me at Millwall. People would no longer come to Millwall Football Club as visitors. So if we were playing Tottenham or Chelsea, where we'd probably have 10,000 of their fans, they would not come because of this terrible television program showing the hooliganism, the fights and the brawls and such. And there were some. We did have a reputation, but we were winning a battle. We were doing many things to change the atmosphere. But once that program went on television, Tim, nobody would come from a visiting team to the Millwall Football Club to see their team play. They'd say, we'll give that one a miss. We'll see them next week at home. And so it kind of decided it for me, and George Strawbridge approached me at the right time and gave me the opportunity to come back to Tampa. And so I came to Tampa Bay in 1983?
I think it was late 77. Well, actually 78, right?
Yeah, yes. It was January of you're right, January of 78, and I came over back to the Rowdies.
All right. Well, so
the reason, as I say, the reason I left Millwall was because of that one TV program. That absolutely, because I'd worked my butt off for 2 years. I lived the other side of London. I had all the traffic backwards and forwards. I was there. I went to working men's clubs, to pubs, to youth clubs, all at night after training, etc., to try and build a new reputation for Millwall Football Club, the same as I'd done at QPR. And so after all that work, this TV program came along, put out a completely false picture of what we were doing, and it just killed it for me. I knew I couldn't win because I wouldn't be able to get the attendance, therefore I wouldn't have the money to build the club, to buy transfer team players and such. And as I say, George Strawbridge knocked on the door at the right time.
All right, hang in there. We'll be back to our conversation in just a minute. But, we got to pay the bills around here, and we want to wish well to our new sponsor in helping us pay some of those bills. It's MyBookie, and can't imagine a better sponsor this time of year as the pro and college football seasons start gearing up. If you want to get some action in on some of those games, and frankly, a whole host of other sports, teams and leagues, not ones that are not around anymore, like we focus here on this little show. I mean, kind of hard to bet on teams that don't exist anymore. But clearly today, in today's modern era sports, there's a lot going on. And if you want to bet on games, not just pro football, but just about any sport out there on the planet, you can do so with relative ease and pure satisfaction with MyBookie. That's mybookie.ag. That's the website. If you use the promo code SEATS, they're going to match your initial deposit up to $1,000, dollar for dollar. That's the promo code SEATS, and they're going to match your deposit, your opening deposit, dollar for dollar, up to $1,000, and that's going to be some handy coin to use in some of your first games that you bet with them at MyBookie, mybookie.ag. That's the website, and you can bet in game. You can bet on all kinds of sports, both U.S., domestic, and internationally. And look, there's some other things too. I think they've got some bets as we're recording this on things like the MTV Video Music Awards and all kinds of other fun stuff. So MyBookie is the place to go. It's mybookie.ag, and make sure you use that promo code SEATS, and they're going to match your initial deposit dollar for dollar up to $1,000, and that's going to be a nice chunk of extra change to put to work with your inklings on who you think's going to win in various games, football and otherwise, as the season progresses. That's MyBookie, mybookie.ag. We thank them for their sponsorship, and don't forget to use that promo code SEATS to get that special deposit bonus. And now, back to our conversation. All right, so let's talk about the Tampa Bay, right? Because this is one of the brightest franchises in the NASL, especially at this time. And here you are, you're taking over for a coach who had already won a championship in their first year in 1975, and had been picked up by the aforementioned Clive Toye, now shepherding or managing the New York Cosmos at the time, and in 1977, obviously, sort of in a hugely transitional and meteoric, that's kind of a different word, of course, year for the Cosmos. But here you are in 78 and 79, literally coming into a franchise that had some amazing pieces to it. We'll talk about some of the players in a second. But what I think a lot of people forget is that, not only were the Rowdies drawing really well, but in 78 and 79, you led the Tampa Bay Rowdies to the Soccer Bowl in both years. And ironically, in 1978, facing off against the very same Eddie Firmani, now head coach of the New York Cosmos.
That's right. Yeah, of course, we weren't good enough to beat the Cosmos on that day. Our success was because we started off very poorly, but we turned it around. And we had a good run. And we got to the final at the Meadowlands, and there were 70-odd thousand there to see the Cosmos play the Rowdies.
Including yours truly. No offense, I'm not rooting for you. I apologize.
But again, wonderful. And again, going there, I mean, the Cosmos were so strong. They were so good. I mean, they had Beckenbauer, Carlos Alberto, Giorgio Canalia. I mean, they were stacked with stars. And so, to me, getting to the final was a success. If we were going to beat them, we were going to have a very special day with some good fortune. And we battled, but we weren't quite good enough, and we lost 3-1. But we got there, and we turned it around, and the boys did a super job. It was a good final from our point of view. We did well, and it was a successful season. We'd love to have won it, but not against the Cosmos on that day.
And not against the Vancouver Whitecaps in 79 either? Or more of a chance there?
No. We should have beaten the Whitecaps, right?
Now, there I was rooting for you because the Vancouver Whitecaps, of course, had beaten the Cosmos in the unceremonious semi before, right? That's
right. But the big story, of course, and I don't think we got enough time to tell it, but I'll keep it brief. Rodney Marsh was our star, right? He was the one forward who could win games for us. A brilliant player. But Rodney was having some problems, and I think he wanted a new contract, and it was decided by the authorities of the club at that time that it wasn't the right time to discuss a new contract. He was under contract, but he knew that we were trying to sign a player from England who played for New England on loan, Mike Flanagan. And there were all sorts of big monies talked, $1 million for his transfer and all this business. And I think Rodney thought, well, okay, if they're going to give that sort of money or big money to him, I deserve an increase. And so it wasn't forthcoming. And to this day, and Rodney and I don't agree on too many things, because I had him with me at QPR. And he left me he wanted away at QPR. And he knew that Manchester City wanted to buy him. And he asked for a transfer, and we were playing to get out of the second into the first. We were right up the top, second. And Rodney didn't play for 3 games before the transfer deadline in London. And consequently, we had to transfer him. And we transferred him, and we lost, because we lost 3 games, and we never lost 3 games with Rodney. But he was on the field, but he wasn't playing. He was disturbed. And consequently, we finished 3rd or 4th and missed out on promotion. So and Rodney was sold to Man City, and that was it. Now, I inherited him again at the Rowdies, and to this day, Rodney did not play against Vancouver Whitecaps. He was on the field, but he didn't play. And we lost that one 2-1. But if Rodney had been the Rodney I knew, the Rodney he was capable of, I believe we would have won that game. But whatever that was his decision. He knew what he wanted to do, what he didn't want to do, and at the end of the season, he decided to retire. And the Tampa Bay Rowdies gave him a testimonial, the first one ever in United States sport, and Rodney left with a very nice paycheck at the end of that situation. But it always will be a disappointment to me, because I saw it twice. He did it when he wanted to go to Man City, and he did it when we were playing Vancouver Whitecaps. And so a disappointing situation. But again, we were in the championship again for 2 years running, and we were drawing, and we went on to draw, I think, averaged about 30,000 people in a city like Tampa where they'd never ever seen a soccer ball, let alone a soccer team at that time.
Yeah, so describe to me the sort of the atmosphere, because it was quite unique. This is obviously before or just after they got the Buccaneers football team, right? But it was quite something. I mean, Tampa Bay, it was professional in every sense of the word, right?
The marketing, there was a McDonald and Little, a marketing company in Atlanta that George brought in, and a man called Larry Jennings, and he was a genius. And he started the Rowdies, the Kick in the Grass, the Wildies, the Loudies. I mean, I used to go to the game early to sit and stand and watch all the things that were going on. There were jazz bands going around the concourse. There were cookouts and competitions in the car park. There was Crazy George up in the stands banging his drum. And people came because it wasn't just a soccer game. Many of the people who came in those early stages didn't have a clue about soccer, but it was a day of entertainment. There was so much going on. It was brilliant marketing. And TV and clubs came from all over the world to Tampa to see what we were doing that made it so successful in a city that had never had a soccer team, period, and yet was suddenly averaging 30,000 people at games. I mean, it was a magnificent, and it was a terrific atmosphere. And again, I mean, Rodney Marsh was brilliant. I mean, he played brilliantly, and he was a tremendous attraction. But we had a good, solid team, playing attractive soccer, and with all that was going on around, the Rowdies were well known throughout the world. There was a comedian came over for 3 weeks and filmed things, and they had a massive 1-hour program on British television about the Tampa Bay Rowdies. It was just incredible, Tim.
Oh, I'd love to find that video or that show if you happen to know where that might be. That's interesting.
I think I have one.
Okay, well,
I have one. I'll check, and if I do, I'll certainly send it to you.
No, we love that stuff. We absolutely love that stuff, especially if it hasn't been seen or.
I think it's called A Kick in the Grass.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe I'll see if it's on YouTube yet. If it's not, maybe we've discovered a little pearl for this little show. This is great. So give me a sense of. So you mentioned Rodney Marsh, obviously a personality among personalities, but
Oh, yeah.
For whatever reasons, right? But give me a sense of some of the other players, because you had some really standout stars. I mean, Oscar Fabiani and Steve Wagerly and Neil Roberts for a spell. Give us a sense of sort of like the talent that you sort of had, and maybe how you got access to such talent. Was that you? Was that George? Was the ownership? How were you able to sort of assemble a pretty solid crew of performing players during those years?
Yeah, well, there was a nucleus already when I got there of good players. Mike Connell in defense, Steve Wegley. There was, who else was there? I bought Oscar Fabiani. I scouted. I traveled the world for a little while to see certain players, and Oscar Fabiani was a brilliant player. He was one of the best that we had also. But Steve Wegley from South Africa, Mike Connell from South Africa, Winston Dubose, our goalkeeper. There was so many. Wilf Tranter, a fullback. I'm trying to think of the other names then, but they were terrific. Peter Baralic, a Yugoslavian, good midfield player. There was a whole stack of very, very, shall we say, experienced players, with some youngsters coming in, the Connells of this world, that they'd been brought in before, and then I was able to bring in one or two of the top stars, and it really settled us, and we had a very strong squad. And as I said, Rodney was exceptional. He was the team. I mean, he was the star attraction. Had a great career, and as I say, it was so tragic in the end that due to a situation that he decided it wasn't quite right. But there was a lot of good players at that time here. There was Arsene Auguste, a fullback from Haiti, was excellent. Paul Hammond, a goalkeeper for a while. We had a good, solid squad there, and we were a very sound team. And it was a joy for me to be the coach, because I enjoyed going to work every day. They were enthusiastic. We had the balance of experience and youth. And as I say, we played good soccer. And we were successful. We won the indoor in the closed season. We had 2 appearances in the soccer bowls at a time when there were a lot of good teams, and it was a very happy experience for me. Tampa leaves me very, very good memories.
All right, so a couple of quick questions on Tampa before we veer off of that. So what of indoor? Because Tampa was actually one of the more stellar and persistent teams in the indoor game that the NASL was tinkering with, and then obviously became more interested in once this MISL came about, which we'll get to that in a minute. But what was indoor like? I mean, you did win, I think you won a championship while you were there in the indoor scene, no? Or came pretty close.
It was a learning experience for me, because it's a vastly different indoor situation. We're playing with boards and such, as opposed to five-a-side generally in England prior to. But the reason we played in the indoor was the league was trying to keep the players occupied, because they were being paid. And they wanted to keep the players occupied during the winter. Also, they wanted to keep the interest in the spectators. And so it was decided that, and I think the NPSL had already started in those days. And so we, the North Americans, decided to play a limited edition, but it was primarily to keep the players active, to give them something to do, to give us a chance to earn extra money for attendances, and so on through the closed season. So that was it. But it wasn't nothing like the indoor that I experienced later on with the Dallas Sidekicks. It was pretty much just a free. We weren't as clever in terms of substitution off the bench and all those sort of things. We weren't as clever as playing off the boards, but we had a lot of really good soccer players. Peter Baralic and Steve Wegley were very good indoor players. So we were competitive, and we won against the other teams that we played in those days. But it was really an indoor league in its infancy, and it wasn't there as the major concern. We were still outdoor clubs. These were games primarily just to keep active during the winter months.
Well, it looks like you sold out the Bayfront Center, on a regular basis. The little cracker box of a stadium. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually, I think, and I'm not from the Tampa area, but if I look at some of the pictures from some of those games, I'm not even sure you had plexiglass across it. It almost looked like chicken wire or fencing, if I'm not mistaken, around some of the boards. Is that right?
Right. Oh, yeah, we did. As I say, it was very inferior to what was that later developed with the plexiglass, et cetera. And but the Rowdies, as I say, have done such a magnificent job in marketing the game, and the music with the Rowdies and all that business, and the Kick in the Grass song. People came to Bayfront Centre in St. Pete to see the indoor team because, again, it was a fun night. It was an entertaining night. We had all sorts of entertainment at halftime. The team would come in an army truck one day, in a taxi the next day. There was always the marketing people of the Tampa Bay Rowdies were absolutely brilliant. And they marketed that team, and the players did a good job. They built the camp Kick in the Grass, all the soccer camps for the young kids all over the southern part of the United States under Gordon Hill. But it was a fun. The Rowdies were fun, and that's why people came out to see them, both outdoor and indoor.
Okay, so one last question on the Rowdies is probably. The rivalries, right? You had two, I guess, crucial rivalries that were sort of long-lasting that I'm sure you have a couple of, I guess the closest thing to a derby that you're going to find during those days, which is both with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and, oddly, the New York Cosmos. Why those two teams? I guess one, obviously, from a regional competition perspective, but why the rivalries with those teams and maybe... was there sort of some bad blood in between those two clubs, or was it manufactured, or what? Because they were pretty intense, some of those series.
Oh, they were two big rivalries. The Fort Lauderdale rivalry was primarily, Florida, the nearest as you could get almost to local from one side of the coast to the other coast. But there was a good rivalry, and of course. Ronnie Newman and I were good rivals. We'd grown up together, playing in the English League at the same time. We battled each other in the first North American Soccer League with the Baltimore Bays, etc., and Ronnie in Atlanta. So there was this built-in thing between the two of us, but it was created a good rivalry. It was a friendly rivalry. It wasn't nasty and everything. And the fans of both teams, there were a lot of people traveled across the state to see the games, or away games, and so that was a good rivalry there. And of course, we would always have to battle them to get through to the finals. And again, we played them at the semi-final, I think, both years, and went on to the final. And then, but the Cosmos were different. The Baltimore fans were always upset that Eddie Famali had left to go to the Cosmos, for one. Also, of course, the Cosmos were so rich and had all the stars and paying the top money and were the number one team. So if you could knock them off their perch, then that would be a big thing. And of course, we always had very good games against them. We won a few times. I can remember us having a big victory at Tampa one time. But they were, a class unto themselves. But they were good rivalries. But I think there was a little bit of jealousy from the fans of New York. There was certainly a little bit of ill feeling because they'd taken Eddie Famani, and of course they also took Steve Wegley. So those two things didn't help the fans attitude. So our fans always wanted us to beat the Cosmos. But two very good rivalries, good for the club. And if you check the attendance records, they were just incredible.
Well, nationally televised games too, which was relatively far between at that time, right? So let's segue to. So I guess I'm really interested in sort of how that sort of the whole Tampa Bay experience came to an end for you. I have a feeling, although I'm not certain, that part of that had to do with the ownership change in 81, 82. But maybe you can give us a sense of sort of how. And I guess it's also the background, right, of the league itself starting to founder, shall we say, after some go-go years prior.
Yes.
How did that sort of?
Well, it was evident that the league was going. It was evident. I think in '80. I think I left in '84, '83, '84. It was evident then that the league was going to struggle again, because of it wasn't successful in other parts of the country. A lot of the teams tried to keep up with the Cosmos, and the people like Tulsa and Wichita and San Antonio and those franchises, they overspent to try and improve their team to be as competitive. Well, you couldn't compete with Warner Brothers and the amount of money that they were putting in. And again, they had a first-class situation where they took the team all over the world. They had all these famous stars, Beckenbauer and co. So they could make money as well as spend it. And so consequently, it became very evident to me that it wasn't going to be too successful. And I was preparing to go back to England in about 84, and I wasn't enjoying it as much as I had done, and so that was the deal. But I knew, and then right out of the blue, as I'm preparing to go back to England, Dallas Sidekicks sent their general manager to see me in Tampa and asked me to come and meet the owner of the Mavericks, Mr. Carter, and the owner of the Sidekicks, and I said no at first, and then they actually came and knocked on my door in Tampa and asked me to come and at least meet with Mr. Carter. And so in 1984, I think probably August, somewhere around there, or June or July, I came over to meet Mr. Carter. He convinced me that to come. And so and of course they were trying to get Carl Rote Jr. at the time as the coach, and it was taking too long for whatever reason, and so they'd already put a team together, and anyway, I decided to accept it instead of going back to England, and so Mr. Carter was very convincing, and I came in August to the meeting. I moved here in September, and the league started in October, and that was me joining the Sidekicks. So it was really, very quick. I say the team was in place, and we had a pretty difficult first year because the team wasn't good enough. It was not indoor players, and the league at that time, the NASL, was pretty strong. So, but again, I said right from day one, all those years ago, when I first came to San Francisco, I kind of fell in love with the United States, and I really didn't want to go back to England a second time. I'd been away 6 years, and I think it would have been difficult for me, Tim, to go back. I wouldn't have been aware of up-to-date players, et cetera, et cetera. So it might have been difficult to continue my career in England. So anyway, no regrets. I signed for 2 years handshake with Mr. Carter, good old boy Texan, and I came to the Dallas Sidekicks in September of 1984.
Well, let's talk about that transition to the indoor game. And for you history buffs out there, you might not even know this, but I do, only because for a certain reason you'll find out in a second. Apparently, from what I understand, the charter of the Dallas Sidekicks, when they started, I guess in January of 1984, I guess that's when they were registered or whatever. They officially founded January 9th, 1984, according to my records. Was actually the remnants of a team known as the New Jersey Rockets, which barely lasted one season from 1981 through 1982 at the Brendan Byrne Meadowlands Arena, that yours truly was probably one of the 50 or so season ticket holders to. And arguably part of the reason why we do this show, because I was just fascinated as to why a team would be come with such fanfare and then depart literally almost in the near the end of the season, almost unnoticed. But that's actually what happened. The Dallas Sidekicks actually would really do owe their very early origins to the New Jersey Rockets. Explain to me the MISL, because you're segueing out of the North American Soccer League, which obviously it and outdoor soccer, I guess, were being kind of questioned as being perhaps not the kind of sport or soccer orientation that Americans might be interested in. The MISL was just like it's rocket red ball, red hot at the time. I mean, St. Louis is selling out places, Kansas City, and you had Pittsburgh. I mean, there's all kinds of craziness going on. It took a little while to get Dallas going, but man, oh man, Dallas was kind of the center of the MISL universe for a bunch of years under your tutelage. We
had 16,820 sellouts on a regular basis. But it's interesting. What happened was that the Dallas Mavericks purchased that franchise out of New York, indoor soccer. And the reason they did it, I found out later in life, was that the Mavericks felt that they didn't want a hockey team in Reunion Arena in the National Hockey League. The stories I heard was A, one, competition, B, there would be the problem of securing dates if there's a National Hockey League team in the arena as well. Also, the point of the ice, that if you had to put the basketball floor on top of the ice, because they couldn't just melt the ice away because they were playing the next day and all that sort of thing. And so the story was that the Mavericks brought in soccer to keep out the National Hockey League. That was the story that we were later on in life. And I can visualize that, and it was done in that respect. It was... and it was in its infancy. I remember, as I say, the first year was disastrous, and Mr. Carter was so supportive of me and the team because he'd experienced a first-year ownership in the NBA, and he knew what it took to build a team, how long it took, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, as you know, it took us a couple of years to get it right. We won a championship in our third year. We were having sellout crowds. And and at that time, in the 80s, there was no success for the Cowboys or the Rangers. We were the success. There was no success for the other major sports in the city. So we, the new boys on the block, suddenly had 16,800 sellouts. We won championships. We won the first one in 87. It was just an incredible situation. Again, good marketing by the Maverick staff, because we had the same office staff. They worked for the two sports with a few extra people, but it was fun. And as I say, Mr. Carter was and Norm Sonju, the general manager, two great men and very supportive. And we turned it around from I forget, we had a terrible first year. I'm trying to think of the record. It wasn't very good. You were 12 and 36 that first year for a whopping percentage of 2. You got it. Pardon me. Yes, 12 and 36. I think we went 24 and 24, 25, 23, and then the third year we won the whole thing. Yeah, and it was a good look. Oh, I tell you what, that first year I was out of my depth in indoor soccer. The way it was played in the league at that time. Why? Because it was more sophisticated than what you remember playing in Tampa? Yeah. Oh, unbelievable. I mean, Ronnie Newman at San Diego was incredible. For example, just for the listeners, if you had the players' boxes and you had the two doors, which 12 yards apart, and now he would take one fella off at one end and put another one on and gain 12 yards and get behind the defense and all that sort of thing. Or if he lost the ball, off would come a player and a defensive player. The way they used to utilize those substitutions was absolutely brilliant. Then playing off the boards. I mean, if a player came in from the angle, he didn't shoot at the goal. He shot for the boards. And the other players knew that was going to happen, and they're looking for the rebounds off of those boards as they come back across the goal. There were all sorts of tactics, particularly when you lost a man and you had a man up or a man down, like in hockey. The formations that they had, and as I said, I came into it, absolutely no knowledge. And it took me a season, as well as the players, to learn all about the indoor game. And as I said, Mr. Carter, thank goodness, was a very patient man, and he bore with us. And provided we worked hard, we were okay. That was all he asked, because he knew it was going to take time. And it took us a little time to acquire players who were indoor. I mean, we had a goalkeeper who was probably one of the best goalkeepers outdoor ever came here, Jan van Beveren from Holland.
Oh, sure.
Brilliant goalkeeper, but not indoors. Not indoors, because he couldn't use his feet. He wasn't adept at manipulating the ball, kicking the ball, which he had to do as an indoor goalkeeper. And so there were little things like that we were all learning. And it took us a season to learn and then get some more experienced indoor players the second season. And then by the time we got to the third, we'd all grown up in terms of knowledge. And again, we won a championship right off the bat.
Yeah, Van Beveren was a big-time Fort Lauderdale Strikers guy. I remember he stymied many a Cosmos.
He was probably one of the best goalkeepers that came to the country in the North American Soccer Outdoor League.
All right, let's talk about a player for this. You can't talk about the Dallas Sidekicks without, of course, the inimitable Tattoo and his unique way of celebrating a goal. But you knew Tattoo in your Tampa Bay Rowdies days before you both wound up in Dallas, right?
Yes, I went down. George Strawberries did a deal with Sao Paulo Football Club in Brazil, and it was for us to send down 6 young players to train down there and gain experience. And our marketing people went down there to give them ideas in marketing. In return, we were to get 3 players, outdoor players, to come on loan and play for us that season. So I went down. I was down there for 12 days. George Strawbridge and the general manager were down there. We were all down there at that time. And I picked 3 of their top players. And it was agreed that they would come up and play on loan in the outdoor league. Now, at the same time I was down there, I saw a little 5-a-side game being played. And there was this young player who turned out to be Tattoo playing 5-a-side on a kind of basketball court. And he was brilliant. So I said to their coach, was there any possibility I could have him on loan for our indoor season? And anyway, cut a long story short, they did. He came up and he was brilliant. And he had an agent, Francisco Marcus, and there was a player down in Brazil who used to throw his shirt into the crowd after he scored a particularly good goal. So this agent copied that with Tattoo. Whenever Tattoo scored an indoor goal, he would throw his shirt into the stand. So that became a little trademark. Well, at the end of the indoor season, Tattoo went back to Sao Paulo, and we're waiting in May for the 3 players to come up on loan. And the Brazilian club reneged on the deal. So we were really stuck now. We were waiting and waiting. We hadn't gone and got it, so now we've lost those 3. So in desperation, I said, could I have Tattoo back, knowing that he would become a fan favorite indoor? But Tattoo was a far, far superior player indoor than an outdoor. Tattoo was very, very quick over 3 or 4 yards. He wasn't quick over 12 or 20 yards. And so he was ideally suited to be an indoor player. So he came up and played for an indoor team, was an instant success. And at the end of that year, I'm leaving with the outdoor league at the Rowdies was starting to go under. I got the position at Dallas, and I suggested to them that they should try and sign Tattoo. And that's what happened. We were able to get Tattoo to come to Dallas from Tampa, and we all know what a great player he was and what a good young man for us he was. He was tremendous. It's a great player, great character, fan favorite. He was ideal for indoor.
Yeah, and frankly, between you and him, probably the 2 people most, forever memorialized with the past and perhaps the current of that Dallas Sidekicks franchise, right? Probably 2 of the most valuable personnel involved in that team, especially during that time.
Yeah, well, we both had I had 14 years with the Sidekicks, and Tattoo is probably the same. And of course, he's now still here. He's now, I think, 52 years of age, and I look back and I brought him here when he was an 18-year-old kid. But we still see each other. We're still active. He's still coaching a girls' team and a boys' school. I'm involved with the Dallas Cup, so we're still lucky to be involved in the Dallas soccer situation. But we have nothing but good memories of the Sidekicks. We had a great careers with the Sidekicks, a lot of success, a lot of fun, and people still talk about it even today. I was in a restaurant the other day, and a gentleman came across and introduced himself and said, how much he'd enjoyed being a Sidekicks fan in those days. And as I say, we were selling out at Reunion Arena with 16,800 people.
Well, we want to probably get Tattoo at some point in a future episode, so I'll definitely hit you up with hopefully some contact information.
Oh, yeah.
Right, 2 quickies on the Sidekicks, and then maybe we'll figure out a way to let you go finally, because you've been great with your time. So you left, though, for a couple of years, though, right? So you had a really good run. You had that one championship, and then you left for a couple of years and then came back. Maybe a little bit as to how that sort of transpired. And I think what you came back to, if I'm not mistaken, was an MISL that was actually changing its stripes a bit. I guess it was at the time when you came back called Major Soccer League, which seems kind of oddly shapen. But I think that was because there was the thinking that maybe indoor and outdoor could be combined into sort of 1 year-long kind of thing. I don't know, maybe if you recollect maybe how the scenarios by which you left and then came back again.
Well, I didn't leave the Sidekicks.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my mistake.
No, I didn't. I stopped coaching. Yeah. I became the general manager and the president, particularly because we changed ownership a few times, and during that spell. And one of the owners in particular felt that I could be of more value in marketing and bringing in sponsorships because that was needed. And so my assistant, Billy Phillips, took over as the head coach, and I went into the office and spent most of my time knocking on doors to obtain sponsorship agreements and finance and such and so forth. So I was still involved with the club. I did not leave, but then after another change of ownership, that owner wanted me to come back. We'd now secured it a little bit better, and he wanted me to now resume coaching. So I came back and had a second stint of coaching with the Sidekicks again. So I was there for 14 years, from 1984 to 1998.
That is my mistake. I'm sorry. I keep thinking about your coaching career, and again, here you are actually running the show, right? So it's
yeah, that's right.
A demotion.
So that's what we're trying to do, right? We're both trying to recollect our memories here, Tim. I'm thinking, but that's as I say, that was it. And I was lucky, and I had a long career with the Sidekicks, and it was. And we, as I often say now, when I see there's still a lot of players here, we often get together. And I always say we had the best years of the Sidekicks, without a shadow of a doubt.
So, all right, one last question on the Sidekicks. So the segue into the, I'm really interested in sort of, we had Ken Tomash on a number of months ago, who was the announcer for the Indianapolis and then Indiana Twisters of the CISL. We got a little bit into sort of the uniqueness of that league, but maybe you could describe for our audience, because I think it's kind of somewhat forgotten, right, or glossed over, what this Continental Indoor Soccer League thing was, because it was kind of, on the heels of the demise of the Major Indoor Soccer League. You had this AISA sort of minor league thing that kind of got its sort of feet and became almost its own professional league in the NPSL. But what was the CISL was a summer league, right? And why was Dallas? Why did Dallas go that direction versus, say, this new NPSL, which had effectively become the new MISL?
Yeah, well, again, there was some concern about the way in which the NPSL was run. And what happened with the CISL was that a lot of basketball owners had teams. Jerry Buss had the Los Angeles teams and so on. And because of that, Mr. Carter, or whoever was in charge, no, it wasn't Mr. Carter, whoever was in, because of the basketball situation, we felt it was the best. There was more security because you had good basketball franchises combining the two organizations, NBA and the CISL. And the CISL was very successful for a while. But then I think it made a couple of major mistakes. and then the WISL was formed. And I was made president of the WISL by the owners of the league because I was then president of the Dallas Sidekicks. And so I was then released by the owners to take charge of the league office, which was the World Indoor Soccer League. And then eventually, I think it was 2 or 3 years, and then we joined forces with the old, I think it was the old NPSL, to make the new MISL. So there was a lot of changes. There was the NPSL for a while, then there became the CISL, and there was an AI something, and it was going through a real period of flux. And so we then the CISL, as they went away, World Indoor Soccer League came into being, and then we joined forces, and I stepped away and let the commissioner of the other one, Ryan, I think it was Steve Ryan, he took over because I was ready to retire at that stage. My wife was in bad health, unfortunately, and so I stepped away as president of the WISL, and the new league became the MISL with the combination of the two, WISL and the NPSL. There were so many changes in those years. You had the job to keep up with it all.
No, you need a graduate degree, and I think our friends who listen to these soccer episodes kind of wonder and scratch their head, but it always seems to end with an SL somehow in that. So, all right, so obviously, yes. Let me ask you one question, and maybe use that as a segue into, I guess, sort of our final sort of zone here, which is sort of the current and the future of soccer in this country. But I actually want to ask you this question. I don't think I've asked anybody from our indoor exploits yet this question. Do you? I mean, growing up watching the original MISL, it was an amazing sport, and I was obviously an NASL fan outdoors. But in some respects, I almost feel like I'm an indoor soccer purist, if there is such a thing, because you look at what exists today with the MASL, and it seems downright ragtag by comparison. Now, maybe that's just me looking through the prism of youth and history and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. You wonder if there's a place for a higher level than there is today, maybe back to when the MISL was around, of indoor soccer. It's a very exciting sport, has a lot of unique skill to it. Do you think that ever has a chance to make it? I know people are talking about futsal, which is obviously a different game. Is there a future for the indoor game, or is outdoor finally ensconced in this country where it's always going to be a sideshow from now on?
I think the latter's true. I think the MLS is secure. I've still got some concerns because I think they're still expanding too quickly. There's not enough good players coming through from the colleges into the MLS. And so we're still relying on overseas players to come in and that's not the way. So I still think that the MLS is secure now financially. They've got some good franchises, good ownerships. They're doing very well in most cities. If they keep control of their budgets and don't waste too much money on overseas foreign players who are, coming to the end of their careers, I don't mind that, but keep the expenses. Don't start making the same mistakes that the North American Soccer League did when trying to keep up with the Joneses and spending money they couldn't afford. So the MLS is the outdoor league, and that's the future of soccer in this country. It has to be, so that we build a good national team. Our clubs can compete in Central America and CONCACAF, et cetera, that's it. If there is an indoor league, at the moment, what I've seen, it's unfortunately gone the wrong way. You've got some clubs that have got good finances and good situations, and then you've got others that are not. So consequently, the quality of the game has gone down. There's not the money for advertising and expenditure, and whether it can come back, because like you, indoor soccer, if it's done right, it's very exciting. It's a good night out. The games can be very, very high quality of soccer, even with the indoor and playing off the balls, etc., etc. But as an entertainment, it's good. I don't think futsal is, personally, because the ball going out of play, whereas in the indoor with us with the balls, it's different. So my situation is, my feeling is this: MLS is here to stay, and providing it does those two things, keeps control of its finance and doesn't have too much expansion until we get more players coming through, players of quality, because we've got to have young America. You can't keep going out like many of the MLS teams are at the moment, and they're bringing in foreign players everywhere. And that's not going to be the answer in the long run. So MLS, keep not too much expansion, keep control of your expenses, and we've got a quality international league, and hopefully we'll build a national soccer team for world competition. Indoor, if it can come back, it can come back in its own entity. It can play in the winter months and be successful, but it's got to have good finance and good quality. Maybe it may never come back. We're struggling here in Dallas at the moment. Whether I believe the sidekicks are coming back. I'm not yet certain, but it's a vastly different game, standard of play, than it was in our day. And I don't say that to be disrespectful. It's the fact that the quality of play in the indoor is nowhere near. Because what we did have in indoor, we had a lot of outdoor players and outdoor coaches like myself that when the NASL went under, they stayed in this country. And so you had, a lot of good players from the North American Soccer League, good soccer players who could adapt playing indoors in those early leagues and being very successful with a very high brand of soccer.
We've only scratched the surface of a bunch of stories and some of your escapades in American soccer, but now's a good chance to promote your book, which came out last year. You want to tell our audience what that is, where they can find it, and all that kind of good stuff, as well as what you're up to today, because you have not retired. You're still very active in the sport in the Dallas area, right?
I'm very involved in the Dallas Cup. I'm an ambassador consultant. I spend a great deal of time negotiating with the top teams around the world. Manchester United, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Sao Paulo's. I build up a long network, and my job is to bring those teams in to our Dallas Cup every year. We bring in 228 teams from around the world, our boys of under 13 up to under 18, and I have that good fortune to be in touch with the teams, be in touch with referees. I negotiate contracts, and I help Andy Swift, the executive director, to bring in as many top teams from the United States and around the world each year. So I'm very fortunate. I have the opportunity to travel to some of these countries as their guests and to bring the teams in. So that is keeping me, as I say, very active and very interested. What else was you asking there, Tim?
The book.
Oh, the book. Yes, I was asked to produce a book. I said no, but anyway, they talked me into it. I tried to produce something that was interesting. It wasn't about this game, that goal. It talks about many things. It talks about my view of American soccer, where it is to now in college, in youth, and where I think it has to go. And of course, I tell the stories of Rodney Marsh and myself, which are quite interesting, and then talking about how I started. And it starts from my growing up as a kid in the Blitz in London and such, and that was put in because of a sports reporter here, Norm Hitzkis, who wanted me to, he knew about that, and he said, you should put a chapter in about that. But it's received very, very good reviews, both in England and the United States. It's selling very well, and the nicest thing about it, all the royalties go to the Dallas Fallen Officers Organization. It's for the children of police officers who've lost their lives or been injured in the line of duty. And the reason that is, Tim, is because my wife was a London police officer when I met her, when I married her, and she became very friendly with the police here when we lived here. And so when we lost her 4 years ago, the Dallas Cup formed a memorial fund in her name, and I'm very honored that all the revenues we get go to such a good cause. She would have been proud. So it's a book that, as I say, I think I've had a lot of people read it and come back to me and said they found it very interesting. It is an autobiography. It talks about many of the things you and I have talked to this evening. And as I say, the nicest thing is that all the revenues that we're making, we just gave, I think, $14,000 to the Dallas police officers from that and other things that we do for the police. So it's a win-win situation. But it was interesting. It took 8 months to prepare. And the biggest and interesting piece to me was doing the research. And I think that's what you do a lot of, Tim. And I found that fascinating. My memory served me well in some cases, but some of the things I looked up in books and discovered and so on and so forth, that made it very, very interesting in putting the whole thing together.
That was a tremendous conversation, and Gordon's been an absolute delight to chat with. And I can't encourage you enough to find out more. We truly just scratched the surface. There's a lot more stories to be had, and I encourage you to pick up Gordon's autobiography. It's called A Soccer Pioneer: The Autobiography of Gordon Jago. It is written in conjunction with Wayne Barton, and as you heard Gordon say, all of the royalties of A Soccer Pioneer goes to the Dallas Fallen Officer Foundation in Dallas, a tremendous charity and an effort on his part to donate all the proceeds from the book. It's a good thing to do. It's also a great read, and you will enjoy it thoroughly, as I did. It's called A Soccer Pioneer: The Autobiography of Gordon Jago. It is published by our friends at St. Johann Press. You can find it wherever good books are sold, but of course you can go on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with Gordon Jago, and you will find a couple of links from to the book where you can purchase it straight away there. You also find a little write-up about the show, some great photos of Gordon and his times and tribulations and all the things that we discussed. And of course, goodseatsstillavailable.com is the place to just check in with all the old episodes that you might have missed. All of the latest that is going on with the show. If you want to subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media, which you can do directly, of course, by going to Twitter at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Facebook. There's a page devoted to us there. You can like us there. And of course, on Instagram, you can find us at Good Seats Still Available. So we appreciate you checking us out in any and all of those places. And we also appreciate you checking out our friends at Podfly Productions. Podfly.net, that's the place where we get all our production stuff handled every week. And if you're thinking about getting into podcasting or could use some help just getting going, or perhaps you're a pro and you just need some editing and some spicing up of your efforts, by all means, go to podfly.net and check them out. And you can't have Dr. Jerry Payne. He's our guy. He's my man. He's the guy who puts my pieces together, and I appreciate it. But there's a whole host of other folks there. Now, I'm sure Jerry will help you out, too. I'm sure he's not just exclusive to me. I'm just being selfish. But check them out, podfly.net. We love them, and I'm sure you will, too, if you decide you want to get into podcasting yourself. And that's all I got this week. So thank you so much for listening. Keep all of your notes and your tweets and your emails and all that kind of stuff coming. We appreciate it. We appreciate your patronage of our sponsors. That helps keep the show going. And of course, please, please, please rate and review us, especially on Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts. But frankly, wherever you can rate and review the show, we, especially if it's good, frankly, only if it's good, just give us some stars and some love and write a couple of sentences. We appreciate that. That's a great way to inexpensively help support the show. And we thank you kindly. All right, we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.